The history of the world is often shaped not by the strength of institutions, but by the sheer force of individual will. We like to believe that laws protect us, that systems are durable, and that democracy is inevitable. But the story of Julius Caesar teaches us a different, more uncomfortable truth. Every system is fragile when faced with a man who refuses to follow the rules. To understand how a republic dies, we must look at the man who held the knife. But Gaius Julius Caesar was not born a monster. He was born a desperate outsider. This is the first lesson of history that Caesar embodies. Necessity is the mother of ambition. In 75 BC, a 25-year-old Caesar was sailing across the Aegean Sea when he was captured by Cilician pirates. These were the terrorists of the ancient world. They looked at Caesar and demanded 20 talents of silver. Most men would have panicked. Caesar laughed. He told the pirate captain, "20 talents? You evidently do not know who you have captured. Ask for 50. For 38 days, he lived with the pirates. He didn't cower. He joined their games, wrote poetry, and treated these hardened killers like servants. He even joked, "Once I am free, I will return and crucify every single one of you." The pirates laughed, thinking he was a charming, delusional boy. They learned the hard way that Caesar never bluffed. The moment the ransom was paid, Caesar raised a private fleet and returned. He captured them all and had them crucified. Cruelty? Perhaps, but in the Roman mind, it was competence. It sent a message: Julius Caesar is a man of absolute consequence. By the time he entered the Senate, Caesar was drowning in debt. He spent fortunes on public games to win the love of the common people. He understood a fundamental truth: the mob does not care about fiscal responsibility. They care about who entertains them. In 60 BC, he orchestrated the First Triumvirate, a secret alliance between Pompey the Great, the sword, Marcus Crassus, the gold, and Caesar, the votes. To seal the deal, Caesar sold the only thing he truly loved, his daughter, Julia. He married her to Pompey. It was cold, it was transactional, and it worked. With this power, Caesar secured a governorship in Gaul. He needed a war. For 8 years he marched his legions across Europe. He fought in the mud alongside his men. To the 13th Legion, Rome was just a city. Caesar was a god. But back in Rome, his enemies were plotting. The triumvirate crumbled. Crassus died. Julia died. Pompey defected to the Senate. In 50 BC, they issued an ultimatum. Caesar must disband his army or be declared an enemy of the state. Caesar stood on the banks of the Rubicon River. Crossing it with an army was high treason. He hesitated, looking at the dark water. Then he spoke the words that defined the point of no return. Alea ea est. The die is cast. He crossed the river. As Caesar marched on Rome, the Republic held its breath. But instead of killing his enemies, he forgave them. He called it clementia. It looked like kindness, but it was supreme arrogance. By forgiving them, he stripped them of their dignity, and that arrogance would be the one thing his armor couldn't protect him from. The civil war that followed was not merely a clash of armies, it was a collision of two different worlds. On one side stood Pompey the Great, representing the old order, the Senate, and the legitimate laws of Rome. He had the money, the fleets, and the support of the aristocracy. On the other side stood Caesar, representing the new world, chaotic, dynamic, and fueled by the sheer force of personality. This teaches us the lesson of adaptability versus rigidity. Pompey fought by the book. Caesar rewrote it. While Pompey spent months gathering a massive coalition in Greece trying to crush Caesar with superior numbers, Caesar did the unthinkable. He sailed across the Adriatic Sea in winter, dodging Pompey's blockade, and landed in Greece with a starving, exhausted army. It was suicide on paper, but it was psychological warfare in practice. The two titans met at the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC. The odds were impossible. Pompey outnumbered Caesar nearly 2-1. He held the high ground. His cavalry was vastly superior. The senators in Pompey's camp were so confident of victory that they were already arguing over who would inherit Caesar's property. But they forgot who they were fighting. Caesar knew Pompey's mind better than Pompey knew himself. He anticipated Pompey's cavalry charge and hid a fourth line of infantry, a ghost line, behind his own horsemen, using their spears not to throw but to stab at the faces of the enemy riders. When the trap was sprung, panic spread like wildfire. The great Pompey broke. He didn't die fighting, he fled, leaving his army to be slaughtered. This is the lesson of hubris. Overconfidence is the most dangerous narcotic in the world. Pompey fled to the only place he thought safe, Egypt. But there is no sanctuary for a fallen giant. As his boat approached the shores of Alexandria, he was not greeted with honor, but with betrayal. The courtiers of the boy king Ptolemy XIII murdered Pompey, the man who had once conquered the East, and cut off his head. When Caesar arrived in pursuit, he was presented with Pompey's head in a basket. The Egyptians expected a reward. Instead, Caesar wept. He did not weep for his enemy, he wept for the humiliation of Rome itself. A consul of Rome butchered by foreign servants? It was an insult to the dignity of the empire. This moment reveals the complexity of Caesar's character. He could kill thousands without blinking, but he possessed a deep tribal loyalty to the idea of Roman greatness. To punish the Egyptians and secure the grain supply, Caesar intervened in their civil war. He deposed the boy king and placed his sister on the throne. Her name was Cleopatra. She was 21, brilliant, and arguably the most dangerous woman in history. Their alliance was not just a romance, it was a merger. Roman steel backed by Egyptian gold. For months, Caesar, the workaholic general, lingered in Egypt, drifting down the Nile on a golden barge. For the first time in his life, he rested. But in Rome, power abhors a vacuum. Whispers began to spread. Caesar has gone native. He wants to be a king. Caesar returned to Rome in 46 BC as the undisputed master of the world. He launched a frenzy of reforms that would make a modern CEO dizzy. He reformed the calendar, giving us the 365-day year we use today. He drained marshes, built libraries, and granted citizenship to foreigners. He was efficient, enlightened, and shockingly productive. But he made one fatal mistake. He stopped playing the game. He accepted the title Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life. He put his face on coins, an honor reserved for gods. He wore the purple boots of the ancient kings. He forgot the lesson of optics. In politics, perception is reality. To the senators, he wasn't a reformer, he was a tyrant mocking their traditions. The conspiracy was born not among his enemies, but among his friends. It was led by Cassius, a man consumed by envy, and Marcus Brutus, a man consumed by principle. Brutus is the tragic figure of this story. He was the son of Caesar's mistress. Caesar loved him like a son, had forgiven him for fighting with Pompey, and had showered him with honors. But Brutus loved the idea of the Republic more than he loved the man who saved it. The conspirators convinced themselves of a noble lie: if we kill the tyrant, liberty will return. They failed to understand that the Republic was already dead. Caesar was just the coroner. The Ides of March, 44 BC. The air in Rome was thick with omens. His wife Calpurnia begged him not to go to the Senate, but Caesar, ever a fatalist, dismissed her. Cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never taste of death but once.
He walked into the theater of Pompeii alone, no bodyguards. He believed his clementia, mercy, had bought him safety. It was the only time his calculation failed. As he took his seat, the senators crowded around him, like petitioners asking for favors. Then the signal was given. Tillius Cimber pulled the toga from his shoulder. The first dagger struck, then another, then another. 23 times. The most powerful man on earth was reduced to a bloody heap on the marble floor. History tells us he fought back like a lion until he saw Brutus. The betrayal broke him. He covered his face with his toga and collapsed at the foot of the statue of Pompey. The irony was perfect. Caesar died lying in the shadow of his greatest rival. The conspirators ran into the streets, their hands covered in blood, shouting liberty, freedom. But the streets were silent. The people did not cheer. They locked their doors. They knew what was coming. The death of Caesar did not save the Republic. It unleashed chaos. The conspirators had no plan for what came next. They killed the man, but they couldn't kill the necessity of order. Rome plunged into another 17 years of civil war, ending only when Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, rose from the ashes to become Augustus, the first emperor. The conspirators who wanted to stop a king ended up creating an empire. This is the final lesson of Julius Caesar. Power creates a gravity that cannot be ignored. You can remove the person, but you cannot remove the vacuum they leave behind. Caesar was the man who murdered a democracy to save a civilization, and we are still living in his shadow today.
The conspirators made a fatal miscalculation. They believed that by killing the man, they could kill the idea. They thought that once Caesar was dead, the Roman people would naturally return to the arms of the Senate. But they forgot the lesson of dependency. For decades, the Senate had ignored the plight of the common people, while Caesar had fed them, entertained them, and given them land. When the news of the assassination spread, the city did not erupt in joy, it erupted in a terrifying silence. The liberators found themselves locked in the Capitol, guarded by their own gladiators, while the mob gathered below, confused and angry. They realized too late that they had not liberated Rome, they had merely orphaned it. The turning point came at Caesar's funeral. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal lieutenant, seized the moment. He didn't just give a eulogy, he gave a masterclass in emotional manipulation. He stood before the weeping crowd, holding up Caesar's blood-stained toga, the very robe he wore when he was stabbed 23 times. He pointed to each rip in the fabric, naming the conspirators who made them. Here is where Cassius struck. Here is where the beloved Brutus stabbed him. The crowd went feral. But Antony had one final card to play, Caesar's will. He read it aloud. Caesar had left his personal gardens to the public and a sum of money to every single citizen of Rome. Even in death, Caesar knew how to buy loyalty. The funeral turned into a riot. The mob tore apart the Senate benches to build a funeral pyre for Caesar right in the middle of the forum. They hunted the conspirators through the streets. Brutus and Cassius, the men who thought they were saving the Republic, were forced to flee Rome like common criminals. This teaches us the lesson of the power vacuum. You cannot simply remove a dictator without a plan for what comes next. Chaos is not freedom. Chaos is a ladder for the next strongman. And that strongman was not Mark Antony as everyone expected. It was a sickly 18-year-old boy named Octavian, Caesar's grandnephew and adopted heir. Octavian is perhaps the most underestimated figure in history. While Antony was a soldier who drank and fought,
Octavian was a cold, calculating politician who played 4D chess while everyone else was playing checkers. He formed a temporary alliance with Antony to hunt down the assassins. This was the second triumvirate, and unlike the first, this one was written in blood. They launched the proscriptions, a state-sanctioned purge. Thousands of senators and knights were declared enemies of the state. Their property was seized to pay the troops, and their heads were nailed to the rostra. Among them was Cicero, the greatest orator of Rome, whose only crime was speaking against tyranny. The lesson here is brutal. Revolutions always eat their own children. The final showdown for the soul of the Republic took place at Philippi in 42 BC. Brutus and Cassius commanded the last armies of the Senate. They were fighting for an ideal that no longer existed. In the end, facing defeat, both men took their own lives with the very daggers they had used to kill Caesar. Brutus's last words were reportedly, "Virtue, you are but a name." With their deaths, the Roman Republic was officially buried. But the peace did not last. The world was too small for two masters. Antony and Octavian turned on each other. Antony, seduced by the wealth of the East and the charm of Cleopatra, abandoned Rome. Octavian stayed, building a narrative that Antony was a traitor who wanted to turn Rome into an Egyptian colony. The end came at the naval battle of Actium in 31 BC. Octavian's fleet crushed Antony and Cleopatra. The lovers committed suicide, leaving Octavian as the sole ruler of the Mediterranean. He returned to Rome not as a king, he was too smart for that. He called himself princeps, or first citizen. He claimed to have restored the Republic, but in reality he held all the power. He became Augustus, the first emperor. He found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. He ushered in the Pax Romana, 2 centuries of relative peace and stability. But the price of that peace was liberty. The Senate became a rubber stamp. The people became subjects. The lesson is clear. Security often comes at the cost of freedom. So, what is the legacy of Julius Caesar? He was a man who murdered a democracy to save an empire. He showed us that institutions are fragile. He showed us that when a political system becomes paralyzed by corruption and gridlock, the people will eventually turn to a strong man who promises to cut the knot. He didn't become a king, but his name, Caesar, became the title for emperors for the next 2,000 years, from the Kaisers of Germany to the Tsars of Russia. He is the archetype of the charismatic authoritarian. As we look back at the Ides of March, we are left with a haunting question. Was Caesar a hero or a villain? The answer depends on what you value more, the chaotic liberty of the few or the ordered stability of the many. History does not judge by morality, history judges by results. And the result of Caesar's life was the foundation of the Western world as we know it. The Republic is dead. Long live the Empire.